When Dr. Phil heard the words come out of his guest's mouth, he dropped the papers in his hands and said, "Stop recording. Now." The entire studio froze. Cameras stopped rolling. The audience went silent. And in that moment, 30 years of lies were about to unravel in front of millions. What happened next would change not just one family, but everyone watching. It was supposed to be a routine taping. Episode 2847 of the Dr. Phil Show. The guest list read simply: Robert, 58, family reconciliation. Standard fare for a show that had handled thousands of family disputes over 2 decades. Robert had contacted the show 6 months earlier with what seemed like a straightforward case. He wanted to reconnect with his adult daughter, Emily, after years of estrangement. The producers did their pre-interviews, gathered background information, and scheduled the taping. On paper, it looked manageable. A father who'd been absent during his daughter's childhood, now wanting to make amends. Dr. Phil had handled hundreds of cases like this. Absent fathers, broken families, the long road to forgiveness. But something was different about Robert from the moment he walked onto that stage. Dr. Phil noticed it immediately. The way Robert's hands shook. The way he couldn't make eye contact with his daughter seated across from him. The show opened normally. Dr. Phil introduced the case. "Robert, you say you want to apologize to your daughter Emily for missing most of her childhood. You were working overseas, building a career, and you missed her growing up. Is that correct?" "Yes, Dr. Phil," Robert answered, his voice steady but strained. Emily sat across from him, arms crossed, face hard. She'd agreed to come on the show but made it clear she wasn't ready to forgive. "He chose his career over his family," she said. "He missed my graduation, my wedding, the birth of my children. All because he was building something better for us. But we didn't need better. We needed him." The audience nodded sympathetically. This was familiar territory. Dr. Phil turned back to Robert. "So today, you want to tell Emily you're sorry? You want to rebuild this relationship?" Robert's pause lasted too long. Dr. Phil's eyes narrowed. "Dr. Phil," Robert began, his voice cracking slightly, "I need to tell you something. Something I haven't told anyone. Not Emily, not my ex-wife, not anyone." The producer in the control room leaned forward. This wasn't in the pre-interview notes. Dr. Phil put down his cards. "Robert, what is it?" I wasn't overseas building a career." Emily's expression shifted from anger to confusion. "What?" "I was in prison." The studio audience gasped. Emily's face went white. Dr. Phil remained perfectly still, his eyes locked on Robert. "For how long?" Dr. Phil asked, his voice dropping to that tone everyone recognized, the one he used when he knew the real story was just beginning. Robert's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. 17 years. Emily stood up. "What?" "No. You were in Singapore. You were working for an engineering firm. Mom showed me your letters, your postcards." Robert's face crumpled. "Those weren't from me." Dr. Phil raised his hand. "Hold on. Stop. Stop the tape." The entire production crew froze. In over 4,000 episodes, Dr. Phil had only stopped recording a handful of times. The cameras powered down. The boom microphones lowered. The audience sat in stunned silence. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Dr. Phil walked off the main stage area, gesturing for Robert and Emily to follow him to the side consultation area, a smaller space away from the audience, with just a few chairs and softer lighting. The cameras remained off. "Robert," Dr. Phil said, his voice firm but not harsh, "we're not continuing this in front of that audience until you tell me exactly what happened. All of it. Right now." Robert buried his face in his hands. Emily stood frozen, unable to process what she just heard. "I was arrested when Emily was 7 years old," Robert began. "Armed robbery. I was desperate, stupid, and I made the worst decision of my life. I got 17 years. And the letters? The postcards?" Dr. Phil asked. My brother. He lived in Singapore. I begged him to send them. To make it look like I was there working. My ex-wife, she knew the truth. But she didn't want Emily to grow up knowing her father was in prison. So she kept the lie going. Emily's knees buckled. Dr. Phil caught her arm and guided her to a chair. You're telling me, Emily's voice was barely a whisper, that my entire childhood was a lie? That Mom knew? That you were in prison and nobody told me? I wanted to tell you 1,000 times, Robert said through tears. But your mother thought it was better this way. That you'd have a chance at a normal life if you didn't know. And by the time I got out, you were 24. You had your own life, your own family. I couldn't. I didn't know how to tell you. Dr. Phil sat down across from them. Robert, why come on this show? Why now? Because I'm dying. The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Even the production crew, who'd heard thousands of stories, felt the impact. I have stage 4 pancreatic cancer, Robert continued. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe 8. And I realized I couldn't die with this lie between us. Emily deserves to know the truth. Even if she hates me forever, she deserves to know who her father really is. Dr. Phil looked at Emily, whose face was a mask of shock, anger, and something else, a grief that was just beginning to surface. Emily, Dr. Phil said gently, I know this is overwhelming. Take your time. But I need to ask you, did you suspect anything? Looking back, were there signs? Emily's voice broke as she answered. There were things that never made sense. She whispered. Mom would get nervous when I asked about Dad's work. The postcards always had the same handwriting but different stamps. And when he finally came home when I was 24, he looked older than he should have. Tired. Like he'd lived through something hard. She turned to Robert. I thought you were having an affair. I thought that's why Mom was so weird about it. I never imagined. I'm sorry. Robert sobbed. I'm so sorry. Dr. Phil made a decision in that moment that would define the entire episode. He stood up and walked to the production booth. The cameras were still off. He spoke directly to his lead producer. Bring me the envelope. Minutes later, a production assistant brought a sealed manila envelope to Dr. Phil. He held it in his hands, feeling its weight, before walking back to Robert and Emily. Robert, when you applied to be on this show, we do background checks. Standard procedure. He held up the envelope. This contains your prison records, your release documents, everything. I've known the truth for 3 weeks. Robert looked up in shock. You knew? I knew. And I made a choice not to tell you I knew. Because I wanted to see if you'd have the courage to tell the truth yourself. On camera. In front of your daughter. The room was absolutely silent. Why? Emily asked. Why not just confront him in pre-production? Dr. Phil sat back down. Because, Emily, your father needed to prove something to himself before he could prove it to you. He needed to know he could be honest. That he could break the pattern of 30 years of lying. He turned to Robert. You came here today intending to tell the truth, didn't you? Yes, Robert whispered. I couldn't do this anymore. Even if it meant losing Emily forever, I had to tell her. Dr. Phil pulled out a single card from the envelope, a handwritten note. Before we go back out there, I want to read you something. This is from your ex-wife, Emily's mother. She agreed to write this after we contacted her during our background investigation. Emily's eyes went wide. Mom knows you know. She does. And this is what she wanted me to tell you both. Dr. Phil cleared his throat and began reading. Dear Emily and Robert, if you're hearing this, it means Robert found the courage to tell the truth. I'm sorry I lied to you, Emily. I thought I was protecting you, but I realized now I was protecting myself from having to explain your father's mistakes. You deserve to know. And Robert, I forgive you for what you did. Not for the crime, but for trying to protect Emily in the only way you knew how. It's time for all of us to stop running from the truth. Emily started crying. Not the angry tears from before, but something deeper, the grief of a stolen childhood, mixed with the relief of finally understanding. Dr. Phil set the card down on the small table between them. Robert, you said you're dying? Emily, your father has maybe 6 months. What happens next is up to both of you. But I'll tell you what I see. I see a man who spent 17 years in prison, then 13 more years living in a different kind of prison, the prison of lies and shame. And I see a daughter who deserves to know her father before it's too late. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The question isn't whether what he did was right or wrong. He knows it was wrong. The question is, do you want to spend his last months punishing him for the past, or building something real in the present? Emily looked at her father, really looked at him for the first time in her life. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said quietly. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I understand, Robert said. But, Emily continued, her voice stronger now, I want to know you. The real you. Not the fantasy dad in Singapore. Not the absent father. The actual person. Robert's face broke into something between a sob and a smile. I'd like that. Dr. Phil stood. All right. Here's what's going to happen. We're going back out on that stage. We're going to finish this episode. And then I'm connecting you both with a family therapist who specializes in trauma and reconciliation. This isn't going to be easy, and it's not going to be quick. But if you're both willing to do the work, there's a chance to build something real in the time you have left. He picked up the card from Emily's mother and placed it in Emily's hand. Keep this. When things get hard, and they will read it. Remember that everyone involved made mistakes. But everyone involved also loves you. They walked back onto the main stage. The cameras powered back on. The audience, who'd been sitting in darkness for 20 minutes, straightened up. Dr. Phil addressed them directly. Folks, what you're about to see is the rest of a conversation that started with one of the biggest revelations we've ever had on this show. Robert has spent 30 years lying about his past. Today, he told the truth. And now, he and his daughter are going to decide what comes next. The taping resumed. For another 40 minutes they talked, sometimes crying, sometimes angry, sometimes laughing at shared memories that took on new meaning with the truth revealed. When it was over, Emily and Robert embraced for the first time in 13 years. It wasn't a Hollywood ending. It was messy and complicated and painful. But it was real. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. After the taping, Dr. Phil did something he rarely does. He stayed on set for another hour, talking with Robert and Emily off camera. He connected them with Dr. Sarah Martinez, a therapist specializing in family trauma. He arranged for Robert's medical records to be sent to an oncology center that specialized in experimental treatments. He made sure Emily had access to counseling for herself. This is what people don't see, Dr. Phil told his producers later. The cameras capture the moment of truth, but the real work happens in the days and weeks after. Robert might only have months, but those months can matter more than the 30 years of lies that came before. 3 months later, the episode aired. The response was overwhelming. The episode became one of the most watched in the show's history. It became a turning point for Robert and Emily. They spent Robert's remaining months building a real relationship. Emily brought her children to meet their grandfather, not the fantasy version, but the real man with all his flaws and mistakes. Robert told stories about his life, his regrets, his time in prison, and what he'd learned. When Robert died 7 months after the taping, Emily stood at his funeral and told everyone assembled, "My father made terrible mistakes. He lied to me for most of my life. But in his last months, he gave me something more valuable than a lifetime of lies. He gave me the truth. And that truth, as painful as it was, set both of us free." Dr. Phil attended the funeral. He didn't speak publicly, but he stood in the back, watching as a family that had been broken by lies found healing in truth. Later, reflecting on the episode, Dr. Phil said to his team, "We deal with a lot of drama on this show. People come here for all kinds of reasons, some good, some not so good. But every once in a while, you get someone like Robert. Someone who's genuinely trying to do the right thing, even when it costs them everything. That's when this job matters most. The envelope that started it all, the one containing Robert's prison records and his ex-wife's letter, was kept in the show's archives. But the card, the handwritten note from Emily's mother, stayed with Emily. She framed it and kept it on her desk, a reminder that truth, no matter how painful, is always better than a comfortable lie. Years later, Emily appeared on the show again, not as a guest in conflict, but as a person sharing her story of healing. "Dr. Phil asked me once if I could forgive my father," Emily said. "And I told him I didn't know. The truth is, forgiveness wasn't something that happened in a moment. It was something that happened over months, over hundreds of small conversations, over shared tears and memories, and the slow work of building trust." She held up the framed card. "This is from my mom. She wrote it years ago, before my dad came on the show. She wanted me to know that everyone involved, Dad, her, even me, we all made choices based on what we thought was best at the time. Were they the right choices? No. But they were human choices." Dr. Phil nodded. "And now? Where are you with all of it?" Emily smiled, a real smile, not forced, not performative. "I'm grateful. I'm grateful I got 7 months with my real father instead of a lifetime with a fantasy. I'm grateful Dr. Phil stopped the tape that day and gave us the space to be honest. And I'm grateful for every single person who watched that episode and maybe found the courage to tell their own truths." The audience stood and applauded. It wasn't the dramatic, explosive applause of a confrontation resolved. It was something quieter, deeper, the recognition of real growth, real healing, real change. That's the power of truth. And that's what happened the day Dr. Phil stopped recording, because someone finally said, "I lied for 30 years." The episode remains a touchstone in discussions about family therapy, reconciliation, and the importance of honesty. It's used in counseling programs, shared in support groups, and referenced by therapists working with families in crisis. But beyond all the professional impact, beyond the millions of views and the awards and the recognition, there's something simpler at the heart of it. A father and daughter who found each other in the time they had left. Not because everything was fixed or forgiven, but because someone finally had the courage to stop lying. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change everything.